Rowe's desire to protect and enmesh her friend within her own personal and cultural universe. Portraits appear above each house, although the homes themselves are stand-ins for each woman. No feminist worth her salt would allow this lecture to pass without mentioning the importance of Judith Alexander in promoting Nellie Mae Rowe's work and helping to give this artist a place in American art history. In 1978, Alexander met Nellie Mae Rowe after seeing her work in the show Missing Pieces, Georgia Folk Art, 1770 to 1976, Nellie Mae Rowe's first significant exhibition. Alexander later collected, cataloged, conserved, and promoted Rowe's work for many years. The importance of women as dealers, collectors, and founders of cultural institutions in the 20th century is legend. A growing literature on women's leadership in the arts underscores the way individuals and institutions have historically influenced culture. The pioneer conceptualist artist, Joseph Kosuth, who specializes in deconstructing the institutions of art, has noted that it's never the artist alone. It takes the collector and the curator, as well as the artist, to make the art visible. From women leaders like Isabella Stewart Gardner and Gertrude Stein to Peggy Guggenheim and Marcia Tucker, the first woman director of the Whitney Museum, the history of art would be incomplete without these individuals and their special relationships with the artists. Many of you know a great deal more than I do about the efforts of Judith Alexander on behalf of Nellie Mae Rowe, but just by looking at this work, it's obvious that they had a friendship of trust and affection. This is two friends sharing a girly moment. It looks like Nellie Mae Rowe may have just had her hair done. The phrase, "Lord, we love you," and the sketch of the tree of life off on the side are messages that all humanity is connected. Rowe obviously liked the photo so much, she enshrined it in this specially ornamented frame made from a styrofoam tray. And of course, there's the Judith Alexander doll. Variations of the tree of life appear in many drawings. Some are titled The Garden, others The Family, as Nellie Mae Rowe exploits this common Christian theme. Like many artists, she seems to conflate the tree of life, symbol of life itself planted by God in the Garden of Eden, with the tree of knowledge, a tree from which Adam and Eve ate the forbidden fruit. This one is ambiguous, I think. Are the figures among the branches the family from whom all generations were born, or are we seeing Adam and Eve in a classic composition from Genesis? And if so, who is the tall figure on the right? A self-portrait of the artist, perhaps? There are many self-portraits in which there are many self-portraits among Rowe's drawings and demonstrate her tremendous range and variety. This too is a hallmark of women artists who are inventive about developing an identity for themselves. She loved to paint vegetation, flowers, and flowers arrayed in huge pots or growing in the yard. And as others have pointed out, dogs and other animals are everywhere. Another self-portrait is perhaps a double self-portrait. She shows herself walking in the garden in either a mirror to help her with the portrait or with her reflection, or a finished and framed artwork floats along beside her. Her gifts as a colorist and the pleasures of embellishing an image are evident here, as well as her pleasure in nature's beauty. These drawings share a device that seemed to become more common in the late 70s and 80s, where a small image of a house contains the artist's signature, a kind of chop mark in the lower corner here and here. Perhaps a way of using the playhouse as a stand-in for herself. Of course, there's a lot else going on in these drawings, but for the purposes of time, these are just two more examples in which she's using that chop mark device where the house sort of becomes the self. In this drawing, the house is once again a special container of meaning. It looks perfect, an orderly, well-lighted space. Bill Arnett suggests that the blue roof may derive from an African-American belief that blue wards off evil, and that the brown pig is a stand-in for the artist who is otherwise at home. A skeletal-looking white dog stands before a tombstone, a clear message that death lurks outside the playhouse. Also from 1981, this drawing is believed to have been created soon after she learned she was suffering from cancer. The empty chair as memento mori is used elsewhere and participates in a long art historical tradition of using a familiar domestic object as a metaphor for death. While the house is filled with activity, the artist is not visible. An angel, the black dog, and the dying plants reinforce this feeling of death. Greedy birds move in to eat the fruit when no one's home to shoo them away. In an indirect representation of the self, here the artist appears as protector of the innocent. We see a woman's hand, symbol of feminine wisdom. Nellie Mae Rowe spoke often about her hands. God put me here for something, she said. He got everybody here for something. That's the reason he let me live this long. There's some work I need to do before he take me. I ain't done my work, what he wants me to do. That's why the talent he gave me to do this work, he gave that to me, because I don't have no children, and he gave me something to do. The hand appears in multiple drawings. In a remarkable assertion of artistic immortality, she says, "When I'm gone, they can see the print of my hand." I love that. They'll see the print of her hand. I'll be gone to rest, she said, but they'll look back and they'll say, that's Nellie Mae's hand. As this artist was creating her yard and garden and fusing her personal image with images of house and home in a growing body of drawings, she was unaware of the significance of the fact that she was creating work in a highly contested realm of American art at a crossroads in its history. Since the 1940s, abstraction and formalism had grown in dominance, while the subject and material of everyday life declined. In the 50s, the influential art critic Clement Greenberg, spokesman for a new American avant-garde, declared that any art that was not purely about color, line, and the flatness of the picture plane was not art, it was kitsch. Storytelling, symbolism, and representation, they were out. Art by women that reflected their daily lives was discredited by a powerful, male-dominated art world of critics, curators, collectors, and the artists themselves. Women's work, especially that rooted in traditional crafts, was awarded a secondary status. Even in architecture, early notions of house and home suffered in the face of modernism's clean lines and stark white cubes. Rigid categories separated art and craft. Get ready, this is going to be a change of pace. When I started studying art history as an undergraduate in the late 60s, we used the leading textbook of the time, which had over 1,000 artists in it. Only one of them was a woman, Mary Cassatt, an American who had been denied professional training in America and moved to France, where she worked until her death in 1926. However, when we came to the chapter on Mary Cassatt, it seemed that the only thing that made her worthy of study was that she was friends with Renoir and Manet, and she had close relationships with the other Impressionists. Critics in the 50s and 60s declared that avant-garde art had to be an art of abstraction, minimal shapes, fields of color, and geometric forms. Of course, there were a lot of women artists working in the early to mid-20th century, but many functioned on the margins of the mainstream art world. One exception, this is just a little footnote of interest, given the current political discussions here in the country. One exception were the years of the WPA, when artists were part of the stimulus. During the WPA, artists were employed in colorblind and genderblind projects funded by taxpayer dollars. The WPA projects hired near equal numbers of men and women, and a very high proportion of a much higher proportion of African Americans and Native Americans than could be found in commercial galleries or museums at the time. In 1948, as Nellie Mae Rowe was declaring dedication to her playhouse, the African American Faith Ringgold, born and raised in Harlem, talked about applying to art school, but was told to forget it. There were no black women artists. She was told to apply to teachers' college, and maybe that way she could teach little children about art. Lee Krasner, who did manage to study art at the Cooper Union and the National Academy of Design, as well as at the Art Students League in New York City, earned the dubious praise from her teacher, the famous Hans Hofmann, that her painting was so good, and so good, in fact, that it could have been made by a man. In response to modernism's hierarchy of high and low art and the systemic exclusion of women, in the early 70s, feminist artists mounted an offensive that began in California at Fresno State College and Cal Arts and quickly spread across the country. Led by Judy Chicago and Miriam Shapiro, the feminist art movement challenged the art establishment's rejection of the content and practices associated with women's work and daily experience. The artists and students that Chicago and Shapiro gathered around them in a cloistered setting in California sought to subvert discriminatory practices of the studio, the gallery, and the museum, and to confront the bias of critics and historians who had systematically left women out. They critiqued patterns of male authority and tried to recover the histories of female artists. Their most visible product was the creation of Woman House, where the art students and their teachers took over an abandoned house in LA, saved it from demolition, and turned it into a collective studio, performance, and exhibition space. Miriam Shapiro, who had used fabric of all kinds in her art before, collaborated with Sherry Brody to create doll house rooms. Sandy Orgel and Faith Wilding also made room-size installations that focused on the imprisonment that women felt in their domestic roles. They made art about the structure of marriage and women's roles, and they protested the absence of women's art in museums and galleries. But beyond subject matter, one of the most lasting legacies of this movement was to reclaim practices associated with traditional crafts and the use